My name is Sue. I'm a compulsive overeater and a food addict from North Carolina. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a speaker. Um, Full disclosure, one of the things that Jerry said was that the three speakers have long-term abstinence. That is true. I had 7 years and then I relapsed. And I've been back in the program since January 2025. And I think I have 145 days now. So what I'm going to talk about is what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now, and why I think I had that relapse and how I got back. Um, so here we go. Um, I, when I was 35, I knew something was really wrong, and that's when I found OA. But it took me going through a lot of experiences before I knew something was wrong. I didn't even know that I ate funny because everyone in my family ate like that. And so it took me having, the husband I wanted, a house I wanted, the kids I wanted, the job I wanted, and I was miserable. And I couldn't figure out why. And I f- I knew that there was some addiction in my family. My sister is a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My mom has some addictions, but it wasn't until I was trying, being a good Al-Anon, I was trying to help my mom because she had addictions. So I was reading a book about addictions, and in it, it said, there are many types of addictions, and one of them is food. And I'm like, ooh, that might be me. So then my sister in AA said, why don't you go to OA, which I hadn't heard of. So that happened in 1995, but let's back up a little bit. Um, I was raised in a family with five siblings, and I thought it was normal. Turns out wasn't normal. We were neglected a lot. My parents divorced when I was 9, and my mom had to raise 6 kids pretty much on her own. Um, and I think I don't know if that had an impact on my compulsive overeating. I think I was a compulsive overeater when I was born. I mean, I remember being 2 and having fights with my dad about whether or not I should have more sweet things. So I was a compulsive overeater from the beginning, but I didn't know it. And it didn't really impact my life negatively until I was in my mid to late 20s, I think. And I was pretty spiritual at that time for a kid, I I went to church. I was raised Lutheran. I went to church all through my um, childhood, through high school, and even into college. In college, I converted to Catholicism so that I could marry my high school sweetheart from a small town in Ohio and, just do what was expected of me. But then I had two really big losses in my life. Two people who were very close to me passed away, and that did not fit with my spiritual philosophy. And I couldn't understand how that could have happened. When other people died, they were either, older and it was sort of the nature of things, or they were somewhere out there. But this time, they were people who I knew and who were young. And so I essentially got rid of God. Um, I I had thought I had a personal God but it was kind of a magic God. Um, and when I had these things happen to me, I I gave up my idea of the magic God, and I had some idea of a vague God out there, but not one that was I could use in my life. So um, when I was 35, as I said, I I'd gotten to the point where my life wasn't making sense to me. I'd given up on my belief system. I had kids. I had everything I thought would make me happy, and I wasn't happy. And I also knew that I spent a lot of time eating, and I really liked to eat, and I was miserable, but I would get out of bed in the morning for what I was going to have for breakfast. And I didn't like my job, but if I could go out to lunch, that was okay. And I was always nagging my husband to take us out for supper. So those things I didn't know were strange until this lightning moment when I read food can be an addiction. And I found out that OA existed. To tell you how small my world had gotten at that point, I wasn't driving. I could drive, but I wasn't driving because I was afraid. I wouldn't answer the telephone. I wouldn't answer the door. I wouldn't call OA. These were back in the days where you had to call to get information about where the meetings were. I wouldn't do it, but my sister called, and then she called me and told me where to go. And this was my first spiritual experience. Somehow I got in the car and I drove to a place that I'd never been before. And I got out of the car and I walked into a room of strangers. And I don't know how I did that because I was not doing any of that stuff. And I went and I stayed for 14 years. And I got a lot of recovery from what people call regular OA. I didn't know about, but these were in-person meetings in the town where I was living. And I started to hear things like, we eat to stuff our feelings. And I thought, well, that's impossible. I don't have any feelings. And, you think it would have clicked that I don't have any feelings because I'm stuffing them, but no. Um, and I would say that I just listened for a couple years because I was in such bad shape, just being totally out of touch with anything about myself. I didn't even know how to have a conversation with someone else in program. Um, but they were very patient with me, and I learned. And I got to a place where I was pretty active in the program. Um, I was at a normal weight, and for the most part, I wasn't having problems with food. But there was, when my youngest daughter graduated from high school, so I was in there for 14 years, so between being 35 and 50, let's say. And when I was around 50, um, my youngest decided to go off to college. And I went with her um, to move her in and all that. And that was devastating for me. I didn't think it would be that difficult, but it was. And I relapsed at that point from regular OA. And I went to a workshop in Cincinnati, Ohio, that had a speaker who took us through the big book and wrote out, like, had us underline and highlight all the different sections, pointed out the prayers. And I hadn't ever had that in-depth of an introduction to the big book. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, what should I do if there's no one in my home group that has abstinence the way you're talking about having abstinence? And he said, well, get a phone sponsor. I'm like, okay. I didn't know how to do that, but I had gone to a meeting when I was traveling one time and gotten a number of this woman that really was attracted to me. She had glowing skin, she had energy, she was a normal weight, and she was kind. And I thought, I'll call her. So I called her and she said, are you willing to do what I do? And I said, yes, because I had no idea what she was doing. So it took me about 2 years, I think, to be able to consistently follow a food plan and make my 3 calls. And I thought I was going to die when I had to make those 3 calls. Remember, this is the person who wouldn't drive. I was hiding in my bedroom. I had two kids, so I went out into society and pretended to be normal. But if I had a choice, I was hiding at home. And even in regular OA, I felt safe around the other OA members, but I hadn't learned how to feel safe out in the world. I would hide from people who weren't in program. Um, so I I was having problems after my uh, oh yeah, I said that after my daughter went to college, and so I had this sponsor, and she introduced me to the Thursday night 8 p.m. meeting. And at some point, she left the program, so I got another sponsor. But that was in that was in 1999, no, 2010. Got to get my date straight here. That was in 2010. And I did get a sponsor that I had for 7 years, and I was abstinent after we got going. I was abstinent for 7 years. Um, and during that time, I had one relapse before the 7 year count, but right before that, my mother had tried to commit suicide, and I had no idea what to do with that, and I didn't have um, the depth of relationship in the program that I could pick up the phone and say, "Oh my gosh." I mean, I was making my phone calls, but I wasn't feeling anywhere near like the relationship I feel like I have now with my fellows. And in fact, later, one of the people who knew me pretty well, because I called her a lot, she said, I used to be a lot more closed off. And I think that's what was happening then, but I didn't know it. I was doing the very best I could. So that's one thing that I know for certain precipitated a relapse. And I didn't ever leave program then. I just kept coming, and I got a new sponsor, and that new sponsor said that my spiritual life wasn't developed enough and to handle something like, a major crisis like that. So I worked on developing my spiritual life, and I really feel like I have a personal relationship with my higher power. And there have been so many things that have happened where I pray for something and it shows up that, and it's not, I don't want to make it sound like, I I just get presents dropped on my head. But for example, when I was doing the steps, I had an acquaintance that I hadn't seen for probably 10 years, and I needed to make an amends to that person. And I just prayed about it. And that person showed up in my office at work. I'm like, uh-oh. So I made my amends there. And, I know that was a higher power thing. Um, I had one more example. My daughter wanted to go to school in New York, and it was private school, and I had just gotten divorced. And so just this other thing, that synchronicity that happened in my life, I couldn't pay the tuition, and I just prayed and prayed and prayed, and someone at work left. I got that promotion, and my raise was exactly the amount of money I owed to the school. And those kinds of things kept happening. So fast forward to when I had my latest relapse. I retired in July of 2023 and made the conscious decision that I didn't need program anymore. And I am on page 32, 33 in the big book. I got my carpet slippers out. I got my bottle. I would thought, after all these years of not relapsing, I can just do it myself. I want to have fun. I want to be able to travel. I don't want to be tied down with all these tools that we do. Well, it didn't work. I was miserable, and I just started praying, and I was given the awareness that, the time that I had ever been the happiest was when I was in 90-day, immersed in the program, working my tools. And I didn't have more time when I relapsed because I was sitting on the couch staring at the television and not doing any of the things I wanted to do. So I knew that I wanted to get back to program, but I didn't know how I could do it. And I just started praying, God, show me how, show me how. Because I was embarrassed. I'm like, and all the rational things went through my head, like, oh, they'll accept you back, blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't pick up the phone, and I just kept praying. And one day I picked up the phone, dialed into a meeting, and that was God, because that wasn't really me. And that's what I would say as far as getting back for me is connection to a higher power, because of myself, I don't want to do any of this stuff, but I love the life I have when I do it. I get so much more connected to other people. I have discipline in my life, which means I can actually do some of the hobbies that I want to do now that I'm retired, instead of sitting there thinking it would be nice to do them. Um, and, coming back this time, I had a few issues with um, one of my previous sponsors. And so I was praying about sponsorship. And, the sponsor I have now is exactly what I need for now. And I think that that has happened to me so often in program. Also, I've had some sponsors that, didn't work out and I had to change, but I'm just so happy with how my life has changed since I got back into program, and how much more I'm learning. I think I got complacent thinking, oh, I know the program, because I'd been doing it for, I don't know, 25 years by then, by the time I relapsed. But there's always more to learn. And I think one of the secrets, if there is one, is to do a baby step and have a spiritual connection. So even if your baby step is going into the kitchen and cutting up your vegetables because you hate to do that and you didn't think you would ever cut up vegetables, if I took a baby step forward like that, I was relieved of the compulsion. And then I'd have to take another baby step. And so we don't have to, in my experience, we don't have to be all the way there. We just have to be willing to take the next right step. And if you're not, well, when I'm not, I pray for the willingness. And it has always showed up. Not always on my time, but it has always showed up. And, that just gives me so much hope, because I don't know what my life is what's going to happen. And I also am not 100% sure that I will be abstinent the rest of my life, but I'm going to try. And I'm going to do the tools like my life depends on them. That's the other thing. I didn't stop doing tools, but I stopped doing them with the intention of wanting them to, of wanting to grow spiritually. You can do your phone calls, hi, how's the weather? Or,
now you have 1 minute.
okay, thank you. Or, this is what's going on in my life. Do you have any experience with this? And I can pray like, the third step prayer and get up off my knees, or I can pray it like, I know what this means because I have experienced this stuff. So if I'm going to leave you with anything, I think it would be those two things for me: is prayer, even if you don't believe in a higher power, prayer about show me how to do this differently, and then baby steps. What is the next right thing to do? Even if you're like, oh my gosh, there's 400,000 things my sponsor wants me to do. What's the next right thing? And pray for the willingness if you're not willing. I do that a lot because I'm not often willing. But thank you for allowing me to share.